Hello, welcome to today's webinar. We are very excited to launch our discussion around preparing students to succeed in a post-COVID-19 job market. My name is Mike Shannon. I'm our co-founder and CEO here at AppPack. But what's most important here is that we have a rock star panel that I will moderate and prompt the questions for, but really the value here is hearing from our panel. So let me give a quick introduction and we will jump right into the discussion. Today we have Troy Williams, who is the managing partner at University Ventures and a longtime education entrepreneur, so a ton of experience there. We have Corey Fox, who's an assistant professor of management at Texas State University and very involved on the entrepreneurship front as well at Texas State. So thank you, Corey, for joining us. And we have Marie Cini, who is currently the Chief Strategy Officer of Ed to Work, previously the president of the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, was also the former provost of the University of Maryland Global Campus, along with a variety of senior leadership roles in education. So we have decades and a wide, diverse portfolio of experience here with our panels. Our panelists. So thank you all and welcome to the panel. All right, we'll keep it moving here. So we're going to jump into a series of questions. Now, everything that we're talking about here as a backdrop is basically relevant to the evolving job market. So it's just a little bit of context. The impacts of the COVID-19 crisis are expected to be lasting, right? Especially for those entering the job market now. Our audience consists of a combination of college students, professors, certainly faculty and administrators. That's where PackBack lives in this world. Certainly, PackBack, we exist to awaken and fuel lifelong curiosity in every student. So, we'll give our perspective here and there. But really, jumping in here, the first topic that we're going to talk about is student career readiness. And I'm going to go into a few questions, but before we do that, just one item that we wanted to cover here is that prior to COVID-19, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE, identified these 8 categories of skills that determine career readiness. Now, the big theme here is a lot of the soft and communication skills. So that's going to be a backdrop to some of these next questions here. And our first question is for Professor Corey Fox. What can instructors do in the classroom to help their students develop career readiness skills that will allow them to adapt to tougher job markets? And certainly we'd love to hear how PackBack has helped you support the development of career readiness skills with your students. But let's jump off with that first question. Love to hear from your perspective here, Corey.
Okay, sorry, I had to unmute. Thanks for having me first and foremost. So I have just kind of a couple of notes, just some things that perhaps that I do in my courses. I think it's really important. At least I teach the capstone course, is to give students an opportunity to express their creativity and kind of encourage them to submit ideas and thoughts. A lot of the times I like to focus on giving them real world, timely problems that they have to solve, that there's really not a correct answer, right? There's not a right answer. There's not a wrong answer. I'm more interested in the process of how they arrive at a particular solution. Anything that I can do to help them out along the way, I think is very important. And I think this helps them to develop some, critical thinking. The prior slide said something about critical thinking and analytical thinking skills. I think this does a lot to help them develop what I would call, I think, strategic thinking skills. And that's really how to diagnose a problem, collect information, screen out information that might not be relevant or appropriate, develop some alternatives, and then have confidence in putting forth some type of decisive solution. The PackBack platform in particular has been great for my courses. I tend to reside in the online environment. That's where I've been the past couple of semesters. And the PackBack platform, I think in particular, is very friendly for students. They're more apt to, at least in my opinion, kind of develop their ideas because of some of the features, but develop the ideas and engage with one another, which I think is an important skill that you talk about communication on the prior slide, but digital communication I think is really going to be important, especially in this kind of post COVID world. So this gives them some opportunities to engage in some of that communication.
Yeah, well, appreciate the perspective there. And Corey, I'm curious, when things started changing in March, a lot of schools went to spring break and didn't come back, stayed remote. Sounds like a lot of your courses had already been online. But what's your message for students, or what was it, in March as you had, maybe some upcoming graduates, and you looked at what was happening in the job market and how they were preparing? I mean, what, if anything, shifted in your approach to your courses as the world shifted?
So I think what was at least really important for me is developing kind of a routine and consistency in my course. And so as things kind of changed around my students, they had this, in my course at least, they knew exactly what was expected, and they knew it was going to come every single week. It was going to be the exact kind of same process. So I think that kind of establishing those routines was really important. In terms of the actual job market, I only teach seniors who are graduating. And so I know that some of them, for instance, had internships that have been pulled back, that had jobs offers rescinded and pulled back. And my main message to them was, we can actually use some of the things in our course to really take a step back and think about what types of industries, what types of careers are going to be maybe most attractive after this pandemic passes. I assume that the effects will linger for a few years, but just having the perspective that we can kind of predict, at least from what we've seen, what the general path is going to be, which types of industries are going to be considered essential, what types of jobs in those industries might be interesting that we might not have considered before. But that because of this particular situation, that we might give some more weight to. So that's, I guess, the answer.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer. And as we go along this conversation, so I'll be flipping through some questions here. These questions have been curated by our team to hope to fit to what we believed the audience was looking for, but certainly panelists across the board. Each question is prompted to one panelist, but feel free to interject, and everybody has perspective, I think, across each of these questions. Our next one is for Marie. And Marie, I think there's probably a few questions within this, because the definition of an adult learner is something we've talked about in the last few days as well. But here's the question: what are the challenges you have observed with adult learners re-entering tighter job markets, and what can institutions do to support these students? What if we maybe first get a baseline of what adult learner means today, and then dive into this question?
It's one of my favorite questions. And so let me start by saying I'm glad we can all comment across, because I think all of us are probably, we have no shortage of opinions. And so,
Right.
That list of soft skills, and maybe you wouldn't think that I'm the person who's going to say this, and sorry, Troy, if I'm going to steal your thunder here, but I think one of the soft skills, and really it's more like a superpower, is that students also need to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And I don't mean that everybody's going to have to go out and start their own small business or large business, but we're entering a period that, look, none of us really know exactly how COVID's going to play out. And we're going to have to recover and start getting jobs, even as we're continuing to deal with the after effects of people getting sick. And so what I think we need to be doing is what we should always have been doing, except now it's at our feet and we have to do it immediately. And that is First of all, let's stop artificially separating learning from career. We're at a point that from now on, and all of you who are just starting into your jobs, et cetera, in your careers, you're going to have to reinvent yourself for many times. I mean, COVID's a big deal, but we're probably going to have more pandemics in the future. We're going to have more periods when our economy just sort of grinds to a halt as something new hits us. It could be robotics, it could be AI, it could be another pandemic. But we can't just all stop and be like deer in headlights. So when I think about adult learner, I really think we need to just change it to a working learner, because adult conjures up, you're at least 25 years old, you maybe didn't make it through, like there's something wrong with you, you didn't make it through when you were 22. I think more and more people are going to reject as a norm that they have to get their degree by the time they're 22. Maybe they will start with a good certificate or a good credential that then they can use for a first good job. And they're going to just have a series of learning, working as they build their career. We should be doing that now. We should be pivoting to that. We need to be, I was just talking to a colleague of mine who's a community college president this morning. One of the things that she's doing, and she's been doing it, I mean, these are, community colleges never get the headlines. The headline is, Brown says we should reopen. Community colleges have been building with in their community and their employers, apprenticeships, internships. She just got something like 76 new apprenticeships. This is while we're hearing that there are no jobs out there. And these are in good jobs, they're advanced manufacturing, leading to better jobs along the way. So I think, without going into a whole dissertation here, all students are now going to be working learners. Even if you are 20 and in college, I don't know anybody in college who's not doing some kind of side hustle, part-time gig, working maybe even a full-time job. The student who can just go to college for 4 years and not really have to work during that period of time and live in the residence halls, that number is shrinking. That's actually a minority of students. So let's kind of wake up and realize everybody's working and learning. That's the typical student. We need to get folks realizing that they're learning and working, and we've got to stay connected to employers. And that doesn't mean it's narrow vocational training. I always hear this. I don't know about you, but in my career, every day I am learning things. I am hardly just practicing narrow vocational skills, whatever that means. We have to sort of be expanding this. So that's what I would suggest. Now, it's going to be hard to do in the 3 weeks or whatever that might be left if anybody's still running classes, but we need to make that pivot and that shift, period.
Agreed with Marie. And Troy, it looks like you might be chomping at the bit, given that University Ventures is a huge proponent of basically bridging that gap from classroom to the workplace. Here's a vantage point you'd add here. I think Troy, you might be muted still.
I loved Marie's phraseology of calling a working learner. I think that's perfect. And I completely would echo the fact that I think it's a continuum now. Everyone's career is now a continuum of learning and career advancement. And we spend a lot of time talking about just-in-time delivery of learning and shorter, faster degrees, shorter, faster certifications. And the question at the core is, should we be front-loading 4 years of education at 18 years of age when the average person's going to change their career at least 7 times over the next 20 years? And the fact of the matter is, anything you learned 25 years ago for someone who's 25 years into their career today isn't very relevant to probably what they're doing today. There's some skills that are very valuable. The classic liberal arts education has value. I'm not denigrating, but I am saying the concept of front loading for 4 years uh, a very expensive education. Um, and as it turns out, many 18 to 22-year-olds are less interested in actually taking advantage of that educational investment at that age. There's a lot of other distractions than they might have been if that was spread out. Typically, when you talk to somebody who's in the middle part of their career, they're saying, "Wow, I wish I had taken advantage of this or that when I was in college." And so I think there's an opportunity as we spread it out across the career and think of 6-week and 12-week programs where people can upskill and be ready for the next stage of their career. That's going to be far more productive, both on the individual level, but as a society, we spend a tremendous amount of money investing in higher ed and other education programs. The more that we can make these really impactful, relatively short certifications, upskilling that are tied to career advancement and better jobs and higher pay, that's going to be a great investment both for the individual as well as for the country as a whole.
Yeah, well, it's a great input, and it leads to the question that Troy, our team curated for you. And Corey, I'm curious your take on this as well as you think about your entrepreneurship students. So the question curated for Troy was, as both an investor and a former entrepreneur, what advice would you give to a student looking to start a business now? And what skills do you believe will make somebody not just ready for a career, but able to adapt to a difficult job market?
Yeah, so I would say being an entrepreneur is hard. It's very hard. The stories that get written up about the people who start unicorns usually make it sound relatively easy, and most early entrepreneurs think it's going to be easier than it's going to be. That's not to say you shouldn't do it. It's just saying you should gird up and be ready for a long, hard path. And if you're not ready for that, then perhaps find a different path. Typically, the typical person who starts a company or starts an initiative in an entrepreneurial fashion, if they're looking for venture financing, on average, I think it takes 18 months to find venture financing. And so you have to be ready to work for at least 18 months in order to, before you can expect to get the backing necessary perhaps to pay yourself anything. And so that means that if you're going to have to do it for 18 months, you better be pretty passionate about it, right? I One of the things I get worried about anytime I meet with an entrepreneur who's early on and thinking about and they want to share their idea with me, if they start talking about how much money they're going to make, how big this is going to be, it's an immediate issue and warning sign that they're not likely to stick it out for 18 months. Because at month 5, when they're banging into wall after wall after wall, if they're not passionate about solving that particular problem and it's not a mission at the core that they have to solve, it's unlikely they're going to sustain the effort for long enough in order to be successful. So start with a problem you're passionate about solving and then go solve that and be willing to make sacrifices. And then I said that the last thing that I really point to is make sure you have a support system and team around you. There's a reason why most successful entrepreneurs are in their 20s because they tend to have a group of friends that they spend a lot of time with who can give them emotional support. But they don't have some of the obligations that the typical 30 or 40-year-old has in terms of a house, a family, kids, a spouse. Not saying you can't have those things, but those things sometimes can add the support that you need. But oftentimes, you need to have some type of environment of support around you that allows you to have that dedication for months or longer. As far as what makes you ready for a career in a difficult job market, some of the same things. I think the key thing is being able to work with teams. I think in today's environment, the concept of the individual contributor is less and less a focal point. More and more so, people have to be able to work on teams, motivate each other, get motivation from each other. And so a lot of those skills were some of the soft skills that you had up earlier around, um, EQ, the ability to listen to others and understand what's motivating them, to help team members be more productive by your questioning or your activity, and to get more value yourself out of team members rather than trying to do it yourself. And so I think that that's at the core of today's job market, is the ability to work with teams, listen to others. And then if you're looking for finding a job, then it's a similar concept. It's the ability to network. It's the ability to build a broad base of people that respect you or that know you, and you're able to easily talk to them and share thoughts and get value and ask questions and provide back to that community. And so I think that those are the skills that ultimately make people successful inside companies and successful in finding new opportunities. So it's a very similar set of skills, both for the entrepreneur as well as someone looking for a job. And finally, I'd say in both cases, hard work. It's hard work starting a company, and in today's environment where you have a large number of talented people suddenly out of work, you just have to be willing to work real hard. And I always say to my daughter a phrase you may be aware of, which is hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I see it every day in many, many careers. It's the old fable of the hare and the tortoise. If you work hard, you're going to be successful. You're going to find that network.
Yeah. Well, I just heard from Marie that entrepreneurial mindset is the key thing going off into your job career. And then if being entrepreneurial means starting your own business, I can agree with everything Troy just said, from Jessica and my experience as student founders. In particular, that 18-month period of perhaps no financing is an, I think, underestimated element. So combining what we just heard from Marie and from Troy, I mean, Corey, how do you take that into the classroom where you are effectively conducting the preparation and the training with, in your case, senior students who are about to go out, kind of wild world? What do you do to try to hedge the bet, in a student's favor in that period of preparation?
That's a great question. I was kind of thinking back to kind of some of those skills you had on the prior slide, and one of those things, and Troy touched on this, was kind of that emotional intelligence. And I really think that is kind of the building block of a lot of these different skills, and whether you call it leadership or teamwork, being able to empathize and sympathize with other individuals, I think is really important. And we talk about, in my field, it's management. How do you manage people? It's very difficult to manage people if you can't adopt their perspective and understand where it is that they're maybe attacking a particular problem from. So I think that's really important. And some of the things that I would suggest in the classroom that I think could help to build this emotional intelligence. I'm at a school, fortunately, that's extremely large and very, very diverse. And so doing a lot of group work in class, students don't necessarily like to work on problems and solve problems in teams in my course. But I'm not here to necessarily. It's going to sound maybe not the right way I intended to, but it's not necessarily to do what they like or don't like. For me, it's about developing those skills, and I think that giving them problems, open-ended problems where they can think, challenge them to think outside the box, to come up with solutions, how they vet these different solutions that they do that they do come up with, and then changing that up. Every single class it's something different, right? There's a new problem that needs to be solved. You're going to work on it with a new team. So I think by kind of shifting the focus here, not just between contexts, but also with the different perspectives, I think it broadens students' minds a bit, and I think it does help to build that emotional intelligence that's so important for things like entrepreneurship and leadership and things like this.
Yeah, well, we commend all the work that you're doing on that front. I've got to hear from Marie, and let's jump into our second topic here. I'm going to skip for a second. So the second topic is near-term student support strategies, and the backdrop to it is this theme here, that emotional resilience and adaptability will be critical skills for success in the near term. Previously pursued students may need to become pursuers as the dynamics of the job market shift. The nature of work may change, and emotional resilience will be crucial. I'm going to skip for a second here to the question curated for Marie. The question is, what resources would you encourage new entrants to the workforce to use to look for productive work? In addition to what resources would you encourage new workers to use to continue developing their marketable skills after graduation?
Yeah, so every day I'm thinking even more differently, but in a very focused way about this. So, Troy started a train of thought that I want to continue, and that is whether you're starting a company, clearly, or if you're job hunting, I think the number one thing you need to do is be curious and inquisitive. So notice I didn't say start applying like crazy to online job sites. That's probably the worst way to get a job. If you hear back, you're lucky. There's millions of people applying, maybe do that a little bit. But I think the most important thing you can do, and it's hard because we don't teach people to do this, but let's say you're about to graduate from college and you really are not sure and you don't have the job lined up, or you had one and it's gone now. You need to start calling people and not asking for a job, but asking them for a half an hour of their time to tell you about what they do and what skills they've amassed on the way, and just you want to hear more about it. I think most of us graduate from college, grad school, you name it, and we have no clue about a whole lot of jobs out there and a lot of careers. And you probably know whatever your parents did and what your parents' friends did. You might have been around that. And there might be a few more things you've been exposed to, but most people are not really widely exposed, and so they don't know how to go after a job. When you start talking to people, they can actually help you see which things might be more interesting or not. And that's how you're gonna know if there's a job opening. And if somebody says, hey, we need an intern, even if it's a free intern, go do it. Because right now you've got to hustle. You've got to get experience so that when the job openings really are there, you can come forward and say, well, I did these 5 projects, as opposed to, I watched a lot of TV. And there are, I don't want to pitch any particular companies, but there are virtual internship organizations, places where you can actually launch into some internships for pay with companies that might hire you just to do a very small project or a bigger project. It's all about building your resume and actually getting the experience. Look, you're not going to most people don't like their first few jobs. They get into it and realize, wow, I had no idea this is what a programmer really does. Or sometimes people go through law school and they get out and I can't believe this is what I'm going to do every day. So it's important to ask.
We have one of those here.
You have one of those there? Yeah. Unhappy lawyers who are changing their career are everywhere, and they're very smart and analytical, so you should hire them. The resources, and I think, look, starting today, everyone has to be in charge of their own professional development. Now, you're very lucky if you're then working within a company that will actually support some of it. Maybe you have tuition assistance, but don't rely on someone else to get you smarter. You really, as you talk to people, find out, well, what else did you learn? When did you get an MBA? What did you learn? Did you have to get an MBA to get the skills that you needed to start a company? How many people say that? Maybe I should get an MBA so I can start a company. I don't know what you would say, Troy. I think a lot of people would say, no, just start talking to people and start the company. You don't have to go pay $60,000. They're not going to teach you how to start a company anyway. So start asking. We have never lived in a time when there are more ways to get educated. You can go to Coursera, edX, online certificates. You can get a lot almost free, some for very low cost. Put your own personal learning together and just keep the smartest and people I think that I see keep pushing are ones who, every couple of weeks they teach themselves something new. And whether it's a programming language or they decide to go learn French or something to keep them moving and keeping the brain cells going. And you have to be very intentional. So that's what I would do.
Well, I appreciate that, Marie. And I was joking when I interjected there. Troy Williams has a Harvard law degree and then jumped into the rocky waters of entrepreneurship. So I couldn't agree more with all of that. And it's interesting the level of uncertainty that's there. Marie talked about there's a lot of different tools, there's different platforms. Well, certainly we still have also at the core our traditional institutions that are serving 20 million plus students or so. Corey, the question curated for you, which is a nice, I think, building point off of what Marie's just been talking about, is now how do you, in the traditional classroom, which I know a lot of your classes are already online, but in the institutions that exist, which is where the vast majority of our students still are, how would you encourage instructors to adjust or evolve courses to help prepare, the emotional resilience and adaptivity of what's going to be out there in the job market to the classroom, and what has to change?
So in terms of what do they need to change or adjust in their courses? I'm assuming that's the question.
Yeah. I guess if we just think about the world out there is changing, so how does the classroom have to, or it doesn't always have to be major rehauls, but how would you encourage instructors to adjust the course to meet the evolving demands that are going to be out there post graduation?
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes back to some of those skills that we had mentioned kind of earlier in the webinar, and I've touched on a couple of them here. But if we're trying to develop emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, and things like that, I really do think that exposure to multiple perspectives and viewpoints is important. And so I think that incorporating more activities and more projects in which we open that up, whether that's not just folks inside of the classroom, but if we engage with our students even outside of the classroom. One of the things I like to do is encourage my students to get out into the community and talk to business leaders in the community as they're doing their projects. We talk about networking and being resourceful. I think this is kind of one avenue to do that. Is let's take learning from inside the walls of the university or the institution, and you can move that outside and into the community. So I think that's one thing that's important. If I was giving a tip to instructors in terms of building resiliency inside the classroom or confidence, in my own course, I like to build in a lot of small wins for my students in order to build confidence. Give feedback early and often, as constructive as possible. And this is where I think AppPack comes in for me, at least in the online class. Being active on the platform and just reaching out and letting students know that you appreciated their posts, you appreciated their curiosity, and just giving them a thumbs up and encouraging them to continue to press the bounds of learning. So those are just some things that I would do.
Great. Well, I appreciate the added perspective here, and we just had a great comment come in. The comment from another instructor in our audience is that I literally just added a statement to my syllabus about the desire for curiosity and critical thinking for future employers. So we appreciate, and that is definitely our aim. So we've got about 10 minutes before we go to pure Q&A to the extent necessary with the audience. But the third topic here that we'll cover in a few minutes, the long-term impact. So a couple of questions here. The first one curated for Marie. The background to it, which I think everybody's probably well aware of by now, at least the speculation around it, is that the economic impacts of this crisis certainly are severe, but will they be short-lived or chronic? So is this a passing phase, or are we truly entering into a forever reshaped landscape that students will be graduating or learning while they work through? So the first question here, curated for you again, Marie, is how do you expect the shift to more online and online ready courses? How do you expect it will impact adult learners specifically? And are there any key choices that you hope to see institutions make that increase the access and efficacy of their online programs for adult learners?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, let me just say, I know that I kept talking about all kinds of learning outside of the classroom, but look, I spent my life in post-secondary education for adults. So I'm all about good, degrees. My bigger point is that you can learn everywhere. It doesn't matter where you learn as long as you're learning, right? And so in terms of online education, I've been teaching online and shaping programs for adult learners. A lot of online programs really are most attractive to what we would call adults or working learners, people who have kids and families and jobs. Really the things to think about to make them better programs are, do you train your faculty? Do you have faculty like Corey, who knows that it takes social presence, it takes good discussions, it takes real world learning? Are they in there with the students? That it's not adult online education, and this concerns me that the stuff we're seeing now is just a lot of information that people are putting up on a website or in a learning platform. It's not true online education the way we've been trained to do it. It's got to be intentionally designed. You've got to have faculty who understand that adults sometimes miss deadlines for really good reasons, like their kids are sick. And there have to be times when you can check in with them, when students can say, hey, Corey, could you and I just get on a Zoom? I need to ask you a few questions. So the kind of good activities that you would do in a face-to-face classroom, which again, many of us have not experienced, not all faculty are good face-to-face, let alone online. You have to double down and even be that much better online. And then key choices for institutions wanting to serve working learners. Yeah, you've got to invest in your online programs. You cannot just put material up and say, that's it, it's cheaper, hey, easier. In fact, it can be more expensive if you're going to do it well. And look, AppPack, part of why I'm on here is because AppPack is certainly one of those tools that helps a faculty member manage larger discussions in a way that can really help students learn more. And so be thoughtful too about the good ed tech solutions out there that can really help your faculty. I think that's really important. So institutions have to be thoughtful about that as well.
Well, that's very meaningful for us to hear from you, Marie. And yeah, the question of design is a huge one, intentional design. So on that note, Troy, the next question curated for you. You probably look at more of the next wave of technology before any of us know about it than maybe anybody in the virtual room here, because you're constantly looking at what's going to be the next wave of innovation that's worth investing into. So the question is, what lasting changes to the education market do you expect will be driven by the COVID-19 crisis? What role do you expect to see platforms like AppPack play in that future landscape?
Yeah, I think great question. I've been thinking about this a lot for the past 6 weeks, trying to divine myself where things are going, and I think ultimately we come away with the conclusion that this has shifted the adoption curve for educational technology forward by, call it, 3 to 5 years. That doesn't mean this fall you'll have the same level of usage. as you might have had 3 to 5 years from now without COVID, because I think people still are in crisis mode. Um, the adage "you can't teach a drowning man to swim" is true right now. In that many uh, faculty members and institutions are in crisis mode, just trying to get through the spring semester, and probably still in crisis mode, planning for the summer and fall. And necessarily, institutions have to go through a multi-month, typically a year process in terms of assessing and adopting technologies and getting through institutional decision-making pro- uh, processes. So it's probably a year before we see the massive uptake of really compelling technologies, but that uptake will be 3 to 5 years earlier than it would have otherwise been. So I think tech adoption is part of it. I do think that there was a lot of resistance by certain faculty members who had been doing it one way for a long time, and um, you know they lean on their tenure or their success over the course of their career, that they really didn't want to invest the time and energy from a pedagogical perspective to identify technologies that work. And let's face it, there's a lot of companies that get some momentum, ed tech momentum, but pedagogically they're not very sound. They're not actually advancing the learning. So it takes energy for an institution or a faculty member to sift through those different, you know, companies that may have raised a bunch of money and they may have a lot of buzz, but pedagogically aren't very good, and find the ones that are those nuggets. I think one of the lasting changes is smaller classes. I think when you look over the last 25 years, we've had a shift toward larger and larger and larger classes. And I do think that as we shift to online, it's uh, it's an opportunity to structure the class differently. And I actually think this fall, you're going to have very few large lecture halls with 300, 400, 500 students in them. Those are going to stay online. You may have your small seminar classes in person with social distancing in place on campuses. We'll see if campuses reopen this fall, but even if they do, you're not going to have your very large courses meeting in person. I think the shift from traditional course, textbooks to more online courseware. Uh, um, we've been predicting the end of the textbook for decades now, and this is uh, like the resistance of faculty to adopting technology. This is very possibly again moved that curve quite dramatically forward. So those are some of the changes I think probably are probably lasting. I think Packback is a powerful solution for building one of the things that institutions are going to have to focus on. Those really come down to a sense of community and engagement by students. I think whether or not you're a residential uh, campus or you're a commuter school, there's always this sense of community that people have. And sometimes community colleges and commuter schools struggle to build that same sense of community that residential college has. But in an online world, I think that's what people are struggling with is they don't have that same sense of community and engagement and belonging. And technology can solve that. And Packback's one of those things that can actually, inside of a course, really build this sense of being part of something. And so another kind of attribute is communication. Schools have not really gotten good at figuring out how to communicate to their Gen Z students. They all will acknowledge that most students don't open and read email, but they still send them email. Um, and the fact of the matter is, reaching students in the method and in new uh, new ways to enable them to hear the message or ask the questions, whether that be an AI chatbot or something else. Those are technologies that are valuable. And I think when we think about inside and around a course, AppPack's a tool that builds that community, but also builds the communication and really levers up um, the relatively low load on the faculty to a massive impact on individuals. So those are the technologies we're looking for, things that solve communication, engagement, and community building in an online asynchronous. AppPack's a great example.
Great. This is the last question. We've got a few minutes. Marie, Corey, anything that you'd add to that? Keep this open a few minutes. I think that point of pedagogy, it is a really interesting one where Troy was talking about finding technologies to invest in that are going to be meaningful to pedagogy. On the side of figuring out what tools to adopt, I assume that same question is there. So I'd maybe pose that one. But Maria, it sounds like you had a thought.
Well, just that, I mean, to your point, look, it's really hard for faculty and administrators to try to figure out, there's millions of ed tech products, and it feels like that anyway. And when I was a provost, and especially at a big online institution, I used to get emails every single day. I could have spent every day 8 hours a day just listening to pitches about something. And it got really kind of difficult. And what you're always looking for, what you should be looking for is, does it advance the pedagogy? It's not just bells and whistles and somebody, came up with some cool idea. It's interesting to me that we adopted the LMS, even though we're not really sure that the ways that the LMSs were developed were really the best platforms for how people really learn. I mean, if you think about it, we still sort of take what we did in a classroom and still do a whole lot of it in our online. So we've accepted that without questioning. And I think what is really what we're called to do is ask ed tech folks, what's the pedagogy? What's the underlying research? What's your proof of concept that this is helping us learn more? And look, no one's paying me to say this. I don't come onto webinars just for anybody. I kicked the tires on AppPack when I first met Casey. And what was impressive was that it works with and to support faculty. I worry that we just send these terrible messages sometimes that we can get rid of faculty. We're just going to, some gizmo is going to do the teaching. You need good faculty. And faculty need to be able to control more of this. And it is something that really helps people learn more. And those are the kind of breakthrough products that we need to see more of so that we can educate more people. So, just would add those comments.
Can I jump in real quick?
Oh, go ahead, Corey. Yep.
I just want to say, one thing too, and this is more directed, I think, at if there are faculty on the webinar. But the reason that, for instance, I use AppPack, it's a great platform. It's super easy to use. It's got all the bells and whistles that you need. It's great. For me, though, when I'm choosing a product, and this should be true, I hope, for any faculty that's on the webinar here, it has to help me further one of my learning goals in the course. So it's not just about choosing an ed tech product to incorporate into my class, but the question is, how does it help me, or how does it help my students improve their problem solving skills, or improve their communication skills, or help them to think more critically? So I would urge that the faculty who are here is, when they're choosing a product, think about what you're hoping the students get out of your course, and then start to look at some of these particular products, right? And AppPack for me helps with the critical thinking, helps with digital communication, so it checks a lot of the boxes, and that's why I'm with AppPack, and it's been a great decision. But I would urge faculty to kind of think about what they're hoping students get out of the course first, and then revisit the ed tech question second.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Corey. And obviously, we've enjoyed and appreciated partnering with you. And exactly what you're talking about there. On our end for our team, we call that a syllabus strategy call. We have to understand on our end what are the course objectives, what are the learning outcome goals, and how do we fit into that puzzle. Because if not, maybe it's not a match. But typically, where we have very deep partnerships, and you'll see this 93% continued use statistic there, it's because we are finding what exact purpose can be served in a given classroom. So we appreciate that. I'll leave this open if anybody wants to request one of those demos or strategy consultation. But we do have a question here, which with our few minutes remaining, we'll question. Thank you, Brandon, for asking. How do you balance meeting students where they are as far as communicating with them and teaching them the expectations of communication in the workplace? In the workplace, that's interesting. Curious, it's open to the panel to jump into that one.
I would say there's a difference between campus communications and classroom communications to some extent. Like, if you're trying to get an alert out, or you're trying to get information around campus closure, or the need to, when a ad drop deadline is, that directly is aligned with whether or not a student is ultimately going to persist. And so you probably have to meet them where they are. Inside of a particular course, I think you can make it part of the pedagogical goals of the course. But at an institutional level, I think it's more risky to say you have to change your behavior if you want the students to persist and be successful. But inside that course, you can say, here are some of the things, and we all had probably professors who did this, said, I'm gonna, one of the goals is to get you ready to be in the workforce. And here are some of the things. I'm going to expect you to do this. I'm going to expect you to do that. I'm going to communicate to you in this way. I'm going to expect you. Faculty member who makes that part of their syllabus, perfectly fine. I think it's when everybody's silent on that and and just says, well, I'm going to email them, and hasn't taken the time to be clear, like, I'm going to email you and I expect you to read your email. That's part of the course. Seems straightforward, but if it's not explicit in that way, either in the syllabus or in the introductory first period of the course, setting the ground rules for the students, I think, again, with Gen Z, it's not an assumption on their part. And so, I think if you want to make it part of your operating procedure in your course, I think it's a great thing. I think too few faculty are doing that, but it needs to be explicit.
I agree.
Well, that's great guidance. Setting the intention. Totally agree. Well, we are just under the hour, and we really appreciate everybody's time in the audience, our panelists. Certainly, if you'd like to chat with AppPack, we are available, and you can request a demo or a call. But that wraps up our webinar today. So thank you all for your very valuable time and insight, and we hope to hear from everybody soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Likewise. All right.